The show was a large ensemble, but certain actors would clearly carry the weight of an episode. And Jonathan Fred and Grayson Hall, in particular, had the lion's share of work much of the time. And it's hard to memorize some of these lines. I mean, the show did not have simple little stories, and you get into some awfully strange predicaments trying to remember exactly who's doing what and what's doing whom. But it added to the Dark Shadows had a charm. Dark Shadows had a very special charm because of the live on tape format. And you do have an endearing number of bloopers. You have actors forgetting lines, they improvise, you have some sets wobble, you have some sets fall apart. You know, some props might topple over. And you know, it just on with the show. And the actors were troopers and they just carried on. And that was the way it had to be. And you just had to be professional, and you just had to be daring, and you just had to be fearless. And it really gave the fear to the performances that was needed. Dark Shadows was very high drama. And that's really what I think has made it so ongoing in popularity, because it really was just very melodramatic. And that's probably the key word to sum up Dark Shadows. Some of the favorite bloopers from the show really involve, well, two things. One would be, of course, physical, visual bloopers. You often had flies in the studio, and an actor has a close-up and a fly shows up. What are you going to do? You either ignore it, which is hilarious, or you try to do something about it, which is twice as hilarious. Reverend Trask trying to recite an incantation against the devil while he's got a fly on his face, and you've got Barnabas trying to swat one off his chin that promptly reappears in a very dramatic scene. You have Josette laying in bed, and she has to knock one off of her hair, and it comes right back. You just have wonderful moments where the sets do not open, the doors will be jammed when someone is trying to leave. You have a window shade crashing to the ground when an actor walks into the room. You have a lamp falling off the table, off camera, and crashing. The atmosphere on Dark Shadows was very tensely professional. The actors knew they didn't have time to mess around. You had your morning rehearsal, you had your dress rehearsal, you had your blocking on the set, but you just didn't have time to be playing games. There are a couple of moments in the show where you see someone maybe trying to break a giggle, you know, as the camera cuts away. But it's amazing how they were able to keep their composure most of the time, despite the fact that you had so many strange things going on. The actors on Dark Shadows really had this strong reserve to hold their composure, and you don't really have actors breaking up in the middle of lines. Towards the end of the series, you're talking about the early 70s, technology did allow a little bit of luxury for some videotape editing. When the series got into all the time travel, parallel time storylines, and you had to have actors looking into rooms, watching themselves in another dimension, there were pre-tape segments that were cut into the show. So as with any series that lasts for a number of years, technology did allow the show to become a little more polished. You know, so certainly you'll see a wide variance in production qualities from the early part of the show to the end of the series. The Dark Shadows studio was pretty narrow and long, and the sets were all crammed in, and you really had to wedge in all the cameras and all the actors and whatever was needed every day. So you didn't have any room to really nudge, and you basically would have to struggle to get from set to set. And the actors really, I think, got their exercise. And you would get some bloopers occasionally of a camera catching a little bit of a portion of another set, or one of the actors coming in while he was still, you know, not quite prepared for the next scene. The directors would often use a close-up technique to help cover when an actor would have to run to another scene. So oftentimes one character would be speaking to the other, and you'd go on a close-up of the character speaking, and you're no longer getting a reaction shot from the other character because that other character has to be in the next scene and they've already dashed to another set. And then the director would sometimes cover to give the actors time to dash to another set by doing a close-up on a lamp or a window, and just come out of that, and just anything to stall for a few seconds to give the actor enough time to go from one set to the other. Jonathan Frid had a very rich theatrical background on stage. He had done Shakespeare, he had worked with Katharine Hepburn, he had graduated from the Royal Academy in London, and daytime television was really not on his agenda. And in the spring of 1967, his agent called him as he was preparing to go out west and teach. And just one of these flukes, he answered the phone on his way out just by chance, and he auditioned and he was hired for the role of Barnabas, and it was something that totally took Jonathan Frid off guard. And the fame and notoriety, you know, no actor's prepared for that. And particularly you look at 30 years ago, and celebrity was not handled the way it is now. It really was a much more low-key and less calculated situation. And but he handled it quite well. He was always very gracious to the fans and signing autographs and going on personal appearances. Jonathan always seemed to be a gentleman and a hard worker. He had to carry the lion's share of the episodes, and eventually he asked Dan Curtis to try to help alleviate some of his workload by hiring another second male lead, and that's when the character of Quentin was introduced with David Selby in late 1968, and he became a very strong second in popularity, and the show really had a lot of staying power.